everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Fish Bytes, the Miami Herald's Miami Marlins podcast. I'm Jordan McPherson, fresh off of a doubleheader where I was at Lone Depot Park for close to 15 hours. He's Andre Fernandez. Dre, how are you?
I want people to know that as he says that, we're recording this bright and early in the morning on Tuesday morning. So, props to Jordan for being so spry right now after 15 hours at the ballpark, especially watching those games, even though the finale was a little more exciting.
Yeah, the finale was good. We got an 8-run fifth inning, which that 8 runs, I think, accounted for all of the runs that they were allotted for the week based off of performance since the All-Star break. But hey, I'll take the action when I can see it, especially at this point.
They got their quota in one shot there. So that's kind of what they've done this year. They've had spurts, but the spurts have been few and far between. So hence the problem we're going to get into. But I know the big part of what we want to talk about today is our colleague Barry Jackson's exclusive interview with Marlins owner Bruce Sherman, who doesn't really give a lot of interviews, at least not like this. He gives a lot of group interviews, maybe once or twice a year, but one-on-one, even though it was via email, but still a sort of virtual one-on-one setting, I guess you could call it. He gave some insight a little bit on at least who was going to stay, or at least who was planned to stay, and others who he didn't really say are going to stay. So it kind of makes you wonder probably if they're out the door. But, I know that was one of the big things we wanted to focus on in this episode.
Yeah, definitely. And like you mentioned, Bruce Sherman, he normally does a general address during spring training. He did one at the press conference that announced Sandy Alcantara's extension, Avisail Garcia signing, and maybe does one toward the end of the year if there's an extension or something like that. If I remember, I believe he was at the Miguel Rojas Don Mattingly extension. I wasn't at that press conference. I'm just trying to run back off memory from 2019. But yeah, they are very few and far in between. So the fact that he did do this interview, albeit email interview, he still gave some pretty substantive answers for the most part. Kept a few things to the side, specifically the question that Barry always wants to know about, we all want to know about, is payroll going to increase? And he danced around that answer like he danced around everything else, but a lot of other things, specifically when asked, does he have intention to sell the team after 5 years and this thing going nowhere? He flat out said, I've never considered selling the team. I'm more deeply invested in the success now more than ever, which, okay, the words are there. Now let's see what happens when you go into the offseason after yet another season of sub 500 success in a time when this was supposed to be the year where they make the jump. Now that that's directly out there and his words are there, that's what we need to start seeing is how far does that deep investment go?
Right. And I mean, he can say that now, but obviously stuff is going to happen behind the scenes. And in the next year or two, things can easily change, and there could be, even now, he could be saying that for the moment, but, if he were to sell, things obviously have to happen. Things need to be put in motion, and that takes some time. That's a process. We'll see. I mean, it surprises me if this is just my opinion. It would surprise me if it's the same in, say, 2-3 years as far as who owns the team. But I could be wrong. Maybe he is that invested. We'll see. But definitely this is long overdue to change, and you can't be stuck in this rut continuously the way they are. And yeah, I mean, offense is at the heart of it, as we saw. I mean, you could blame it on injuries, but injuries happen all around the league. And there's a lot of teams that you've seen that have been wrecked by injuries and still find a way to figure it out, still find a way to press on. Maybe their performance is hindered to a degree, but not like this. I think the Marlins neighbors to the not so far northwest of the state are a good example of that this year. They were wrecked, and then look how they may not win the division, but look how they made it a fight toward the end, capitalizing on how the front running Yankees have fallen, but the Rays are right in, and they had a ton of injuries. That's just one example. And it just shows you like this, the decisions they made in the offseason. I mean, I don't think they didn't, a couple of guys didn't work out. I mean, I know Jorge Soler got hurt, which didn't help, but the Avisail Garcia part of it, was a big disappointment. So again, you're left with a half good franchise in the sense of the pitching, and even on that side of it, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, but it's not as deep as it was. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I think there's still a few that you look forward to in the minor league system that are on the way up. Yuri Perez is one of those guys, but we're not talking about we're not talking about it the way we were like in 2019 or even 2020, where we were like, wow, there's this guy coming up, and you're really excited. So there's a lot of questions. I think the internal changes are going to be the interesting thing to follow, and I think you're going to have your hands full. I think once that comes around, like October, November, just kind of keeping track. I mean, even I'd be really surprised at this point if Don Mattingly is still the manager next year. I hope he lands on his feet, whatever he ends up wanting to do or is able to do, because always was like a very tough spot during these last few years. And, obviously we know after 2016 and what happened with Jose, that was the big chance to take a team to another level, but since then it's been a real tough situation just to be able to fight their way out of this rut, and they really haven't been able to. So, it'll be interesting.
Yeah. And to go back to a few of your points, on the player side, the minor league side, Yuri Perez is great, but is he going to hit 2-run home runs, driving 55, 60, 70 guys?
No, right.
Again, that's the big problem. I mean, we see the rotation. Right. We see that's not a problem. The Marlins are actually at the point after calling Braxton Garrett or adding Braxton Garrett back from the IL. They have 6 starters in the rotation right now. They very well could be going 6 man at this point. Again, but looking at the bats and the ones that are developing or really are not developing, that's been one of the biggest crux, in addition to not signing any damn bats that could actually give them a chance. When you look at, you mentioned the team to the northwest in the state, look at the team a state north of them, and how every one of their young guys seems to work out. The Marlins can't find one that works out from being a homegrown person from draft or international free agency to making it all the way to the big leagues and panning out. Yeah. They don't have that. The closest they have right now is Gerard, who, again, I like the power potential, but when you're hitting below the Mendoza line, there's really not much we can really hype up. Yeah. JJ Bleday's got the plate discipline, but he's still striking out 35-40% of the time. He still hasn't made that jump. Their most successful guy from their group that they called up is Charles Leblanc, who they acquired through the minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft in December. And even he had that great run the first 13 games and then fell off, which, again, once the league adjusted, he hasn't responded, which has been the problem with basically every Marlins hitting prospect that comes up. They start off hot, and then the league adjusts, and they don't adjust back. Or they take forever to get up here, and when they do get up here, they just flame out right away.
Yeah, and to top it off, you're not this entire second half of the season is by far not the ideal situation to be developing guys.
Definitely not.
In this terrible lineup, in the way that the psychological constant losing of this team right now, this is not the environment to develop guys to begin with. And then on top of that, like you're saying, none of these, they don't have that one. You don't see that homegrown player that comes up, gets it, and yes, everyone, even those guys, have a little bit of time that they need to progress and develop and learn and league adjust and whatnot. But then they fight through it, and then you hear about them, and then suddenly they're mainstays on their teams. That just hasn't really happened. I mean, the one guy through a trade is Jazz, and even Jazz has had his moments too, where he's struggled a little bit on the hitting side. But he's the only one you could point to and say, okay, now you look at him and he's your long-term shortstop there. But other than that, I mean, that's the big issue. It's like we're here in year 5 and still waiting for, where's that surplus on that side of it? And that's what I meant before on the pitching side, is just that used to be the lean, like, boasting this great deep staff, which even now isn't as deep as it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And now to go back to the other point of moves are going to be made. I mean, from everything that's been gathered, Kim Ang is expected to be back for her 3rd year as general manager, which should be expected. I mean, if you look at year one when she was GM, everything ran through Derek Jeter. So who knows exactly how much control she had in those decision making. Same with everything up to when Derek Jeter left right before the lockout ended and spring training started, which is when really the only moves they made from that point on were signing Jorge Soler and trading for Tanner Scott and Cole Sulser. So the moves beforehand, again, it's hard to tell exactly how much of the roster construction was done with her getting, or how much of the final say that she had, which means this upcoming offseason will be really critical to being able to start a true evaluation process for how well Kim Ng can do as a general manager. And it's also going to be interesting to see how she does when the staff around her, how much of an overhaul there is around her. The main people, I mean, she seems to be safe, as does COO Caroline O'Connor, who's been handling the business side since Derek Jeter left. But everyone else, I mean, you can look at, I could easily see moves being made in the analytics department. I feel like there should be moves made in the player development side, whether it's from the top or trickling on down. After seeing how the lack of development, after how hyped the Marlins minor league system has been as they've revamped it over these 5 years, and to not see any true results on the hitting side specifically, changes need to be made there. I mean, they're at the point where they can't just keep hovering around and going, oh, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. We'll try again next year. It's basically, it's the definition of insanity. You're repeating the same thing and expecting different results. It's not going to work.
That you have to make a change in the real managers of the team.
Yes.
As we've talked about, because Donnie, not just Donnie, but managers in baseball pretty much in general have now become glorified caretakers and locker room guys, locker room coaches at this point. They're being told how to make their lineups and the day-to-day operation and everything, so that is the core of it. That clearly hasn't worked, anywhere near the degree that they were hoping for. And I think that's where the house cleaning definitely has to happen, for this team. I mean, whether Donnie's the manager or not, I don't think it's going to make that huge of an impact, to be honest. And that it's a shame, because not just him, but you see a lot of guys who probably, the way it was before, had good managerial instincts, the Dusty Bakers of the world and guys of that, the guys with that kind of experience, and that's going away the way the game has changed. So
again, that's why we talked about it with Joe Madden last week, and just him being open about it now that after he got fired by the Angels, just they basically saying the part that he couldn't say while he was under contract, being able to finally put it all out there about, it's to the point where, hey, maybe the main person in analytics or the general manager should be wearing the uniform, being on the field and fielding the questions.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and he this is coming from one of the best managers in the game. So, I mean, that's a way. But in general, I mean, going back to the main point here, I think that's the two critical areas for sure that have clearly not worked, and especially on the development side. And I know that's going to sort of jump us to the next segment, which we were going to talk about the rule changes coming in baseball, which is kind of interesting. I think one of them applies in the sense of analytics, where they're going to ban shifting, which has been a huge part of how teams approach everything now. So now we're going back to old school. If you're a lefty, you got to be celebrating, thinking, "Oh my God, the right field is back open." Or at least mostly compared to how it's been. The rule changes that are going. In fact, there are a few of them, and we'll try dive into each of them. We'll start with the shift, like Andre said. It's basically two out. You have to have two players on each side of second base and on the infield dirt. So no more of that third guy hovering in that shallow right field. No more Brian Anderson area. Running from third in the shallow right,
no Brian Anderson playing both positions the Marlins think he can play simultaneously.
Right.
No fourth outfielder. You can do fifth out. You can do the fifth infielder in those close situations, though. It's just a minimum of 2 on each side. So you can do a fifth
but it's
infield.
somewhat,
Yeah.
but it's somewhat, it's still going to somewhat reduce the fact that like every time you're putting 4 guys all the way to the right, you have one guy practically in foul ground down the first base line almost.
Yeah.
And making it impossible for righties and leaving a huge chasm on the left side, which nobody ever hits it to.
Yeah, one of my favorites is still the Manny Machado when he was like basically in deep right field and ended up making like a 354-foot pop out to the third baseman in right field. Yeah,
I'm gonna miss the routine grounder to the third base side, the little bleeder up the third base line that's gonna sit there all by itself and just like die on the infield grass because no one's even near. I'm gonna miss that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it seems to, I mean, it's probably just anecdotal, but it seemed like every time the Marlins shifted, or a fair amount of times the Marlins shifted when they didn't need to, it came back to bite them in the ass. Just and it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I should have pulled up the numbers, and I'll end up probably doing that in a story later on to actually break down how this stuff should help them out or hinder them. But you look at a lot of the situations when you have a ground ball pitcher on the mound who he knows where he needs his spots and gets burned by the shift because they shifted him and a left-handed hitter beats the shift when regular formation would have gotten the easy out.
Oh, you mean your Cy Young favorite, who's the king of double plays?
He's one of them. And then I also think specifically of Richard Blyer and the relief side of it.
Oh, that was on the relief side for sure.
Yeah. No, because again, he's a guy who's 60% ground balls. And again, with the lefty matchups, they have the shift going with everyone on the right side. And he gets a ground ball. He makes the pitch, gets the ball for the lefty to hit it where it should be on basically where shortstop should be. And there's no shortstop there. Or the third baseman covering shortstop because the shortstop's standing next to the second baseman now. But the shift will be interesting. The other one, which I know from a media standpoint, I'm ecstatic about, pitch clock. We are going to be, I believe the numbers are 15 seconds when there's no one on base and 19 seconds when there are runners on base. You can only release from the mound twice. I believe you can only throw over for pickoff attempts a certain amount of times, which that's going to be interesting to me when you have a guy like a John Birdie on base. It's going to bring stolen. That's going to give you a chance for your speedsters to actually start stealing bases again.
I love this because the power game is one thing, but the way it's just a home run or a strikeout most of the time. I like, you need to incorporate some of that old school baseball and bring back some of that. And I think this is going to facilitate having a mixture of all of that back, where you're still going to have the power game, but less strikeouts and a little more of the strategy going on of stealing bases and whatnot. I love it. And then the pitch clock, you and I have both seen it at the minor league level this year. I mean, I went to a jumbo shrimp game up in Jacksonville, an hour and 45. Granted, it was a 1-0 game, but it flew. My wife and I looked at each other at 8:45 that night. It was a 7:00 start. We were like, we're in the 9th? And said a word I can't say on this show, or I shouldn't say on this show. And let's just say the fireworks show that night, it was on the 4th of July, and the fireworks were going off already at 9:15 because the game just breezed by. So, I mean, that's an extreme example because of the 1-0, but in general, you're just going to avoid most of these 4-hour unnecessary marathons where the game just drags and drags. Especially it's not, a lot of times it happens, doesn't even happen in a good game. Like sometimes you might have a good back and forth, maybe like a 12-11 game that's exciting, but a lot of times it's just a rout and it just won't end. And I know the Marlins have been on the receiving end of a lot of those this year,
No, I mean, I was at one of those minor league routes just a few days ago. I went up on Saturday to see Yuri Perez pitch for the Jupiter Hammerheads, his first game of the month for going out of the rehab outing. Final score of that game was 14-1. There was an hour rain delay during the third inning. Even with the delay, it was a 3.5-hour game. So remove the rain delay, a 14-1 game was basically 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's a 5-hour experience minimum if under normal circumstances.
Oh, yeah. And just to top off, since I mentioned Jerry Perez and Andre mentioned him earlier, 2 scoreless innings, gave up 1 hit, struck out 4 of the 7 batters he faced. And this was after he missed a month with a minor shoulder injury. And honestly, it's good to see him back now because AA Pensacola has 1 more week of the regular season and then they're in the playoffs. Hey, right. Again, at least we get 1 playoff team in this organization this season. So I'm
happy for the Panhandle. They get to see what we don't see down here in Miami.
Yeah, but with Yuri being able to go Saturday, it gives them a chance to get 1 more start in AA and then potentially be available for one of those best-of-3 playoff games and close the season on a high note, close the season healthy, close the season on the mound, which for the Marlins' top prospect, for the number 10 overall prospect in baseball, to see that and to see one of the few highlights left in that minor league system, to have him finish on a high note and go into the offseason healthy and feeling good, that is much needed.
Yeah, and in all seriousness, it is good experience for him to pitch in those types of games. You know, I know people say, "Oh, it's the minor league playoffs," but you know, you get that little bit of that, you know, more urgent game, more urgent situation sense when you're on the mound, and that's good. That's good experience for a guy like him at this point in his career, you know, developing in that stage. So that's definitely going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and one other thing on the pitch clock to wrap this up before going on to the final rule change. Pitchers need to be ready to pitch with, I believe it's 9 seconds on the clock, and hitters will need to be in the box with at least 8 seconds on the clock. So again, the pitch clock impacts the hitters as much as it does the pitchers, which means when a pitch goes inside and you see players reacting and doing their loop around the base, loop around home plate and doing all their shaking off, if they're not in the box with 8 seconds left, it's an automatic strike against them. If the pitcher doesn't get their pitch off by the time the clock ends, it's an automatic ball. So again, it works both ways. And we've both seen few certain players that seem to take their sweet, precious time getting back into the box after almost each pitch or heaven forbid, anything go slightly inside against them.
I can't wait for the first tirade because this happens and someone thinks I didn't take too much time.
Yep.
You know that's gonna happen. That's gonna be funny. That's gonna happen. But yeah, another one that I don't think a lot of people that don't follow baseball as closely might not be aware of. And I think if you want to explain how this one's gonna work, the bigger bases.
Yeah.
How much bigger bases? Are we talking Jose Altuve standing on top of the base with 2 feet and perfectly fitting on top of him, or what are we?
Yeah, it's not drastically changing. The bases as they are right now are 15 square inches. They're expanding to 18 square inches. So,
so people out there, just so I know, that's why I wanted you to say it, because I think people have this weird idea of like the base being able to be seen from the top of the stadium now.
No,
like
so
no, we're not talking about. It's not going to be that much of a change, but
it's
slightly.
It's not massively big. It is enough to potentially make bang bang plays that are already close to sway them probably more toward the runner. And it's also, it helps health-wise in terms of with the bags being bigger, especially for first base. When you have the runner coming down, the first base will be slightly farther away from the runner. So able to get the ball a little bit quicker, a little bit shorter of a throw, less collisions. Although speaking of collision, I need to throw back to last series in Philly. Shout out to Richard Blyer, who we've already mentioned on the show. 7th inning, Brandon Marsh ground ball down the line. Blyer grabbed it, had no idea where the bag was, so just ran and dove to the bag and tackled Brandon Marsh and got the out. And got the out as they collided at the base because Blyer got there first. So
he looked he looked like he was on kickoff coverage.
Yeah, and the thing is, took him out. And the thing is, it happened about an hour after Thursday night kickoff. So Thursday night football kicked off. So
it was perfect.
It was perfect timing, and it's just a reminder that baseball players sometimes can be athletes.
Sometimes. Yeah. But no, that was that was interesting. I saw it. I was like, oh wow, like almost took him out. And the kickers covering on the coverage team probably had to be proud of him for that one for sure. But no, but I this whole, again, that's another rule that is going to help, the base running. And again, just kind of like a little bit of bringing back some of the elements that made baseball fun, besides the home run game, so I like it. I'm interested to see how a lot of this is going to work. And I think, all that's left now is the robo-umps, if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, and it still feels like it's a matter of when, not if, with those. Right. Since again, they've been experimenting with them in single A. When I was at Jupiter, I actually got to see how some of it worked, where the way that it was explained to me is they have in their 6-game schedule over a week, if I'm right, it's 1 or 2 games where it's solely the umpire, 1 or 2 games, I believe it's 2 games where it's the umpire doing it traditionally, 2 games where it's no matter what, whatever the automatic ball strike system says goes. And when I was there Saturday, each team is able to challenge calls. They get, I think it's 3 challenges each. And it's literally if a pitch was called a strike and the hitter thinks it's a ball, all he has to do is tap his head. And the umpire turns around, points up to the press box area where all the results are happening. And the person next to him goes, yeah, that was a strike. And then if it confirms it, they lose one of the challenges. If it's reversed, they hold on to that challenge. And they basically get to keep them until they have 3 that are basically 3 mistakes or 3 challenges that aren't overturned. So it gives you the chance to get your second chance, which basically it's a way to test how good is the batter's eye versus the robotic umpire. And also, and those adjustments and those challenges also I'm assuming are going to be playing a part with the adjustments to try to get the robotic ump to be as close to perfect as possible, which again, getting the in-game, in-moment perspective of it, to me, that's beneficial. And it didn't really take up time too. It was maybe 5 seconds total, which we see how long some of these challenges drag in the big leagues for plays a lot of times that are just routine. So for this, again, I've been on board with the robo-umps for a while now. I'm ready to see how it goes. And for me, it's just, again, like I said, a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, usually I'm not much for baseball, which loves to tinker with its game over and over and over in many different ways. But this wave of rule changes that we just went over, for the most part, I'm looking forward to it. I think some of them are needed, and I'm curious to see the effect it's going to have. I hope it's a positive effect, honestly.
Yeah, for me, it basically just to sum it up all in one. There should be more action, and it should be in less time. So basically, getting the motion of the game going more while also shortening the time of each game.
Yeah. And I think there's a current generation of younger baseball fans that, it hasn't been that long, but I think maybe some people have almost forgotten the fun element. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know I keep going back to base running and things like that, like the fun element of some strategy to the game. And I feel like that is going to help. I think it's going to make it more exciting. And even from not even a fan perspective, but just from a team, like I think it's going to help some teams when you're not, when you don't have the Dodgers lineup, you could still find ways to win because it's going to be a little more, a little more involved where you can, create runs easier, that sort of thing.
Yep. No doubt about it. And I think that's going to wrap us up for this week's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. We have about 2 or 3 more of these before the season ends.
3.
So we have 3 more. Thank you, Andre. Again, counting is hard, especially at 8:42 after.
Because remember, you'll have the 2 weeks left of the season, and then we'll have a kind of a season wrap.
Yeah, the season recap. Yeah,
and then we'll come back during the off season once we get it a little closer to the winter meetings and such.
And during the off season we'll be recording when there is news to record. Probably won't be every week, but maybe twice a month, something like that, depending on when the news comes and how much we have to report. But for now, this is going to be it for this week. We will be back again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.